Kia ora everybody, welcome to this live presentation on maternal birth injuries part 2. I'm Dawn, one of the Plunket nurses working at Plunket Line. I'm just going to ask our guest, Kate, to introduce herself.
Kia ora, and tēnā tātou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko ingarangi raua eirana ngā whakapaparanga mai. Ko te whanganui atara te whenua tupu. Ko Pohangina te kāinga, he founder and CEO o e Birth Trauma Aotearoa. Ko Kate o tēnā tātou katoa. Very briefly, kia ora everyone, my name's Kate Hicks. I'm a Manawatu-based full-time mum to 2 little ones, fast-growing little ones. I've been working in the birth trauma space for around 8 years following the tricky birth of my daughter. I started working in the space by creating a birth trauma support website called My Birth Story. And more recently, I set up Birth Trauma Aotearoa, which is a registered charitable trust. And we do work across New Zealand. We do education, advocacy, research and support for whānau who've been impacted by either psychological or physical birth trauma or both. So it's a pleasure to be here tonight to talk about psychological birth trauma. And just a few notes about our kōrero that Dawn and I wanted to kind of share was that tonight we talk about some pretty heavy stuff, hey Dawn? So we just wanted to remind everybody to take care and tag out if you need to. As I understand this live chat's been recorded, so you could always tag out and come back to it later on if people needed to. If things feel really tough for people and get a bit overwhelming tonight, then the mybirthstory.org.nz website has all of the crisis line numbers listed on there, so people can find that under the external resources page. And then lastly, if anybody needs it, you can call or free text, I think 1737, and that lets people talk to a trained counsellor. So, and just be mindful, I guess, that things may bubble up for people over the next days or weeks if they have been kind of going there with the birth experience.
I just also want to add in there, Kate, also Plunket Line is there 24/7, so give us a call at any time. You're allowed to call us as many times in a 24-hour period, and you'll get to talk to a Plunket nurse, if you're wondering about anything that may come up tonight for you. If you're wanting to, then the first part of this presentation was recorded and the links will be provided throughout the chat here as well if you want to go back and look at that on YouTube. So today we'll be discussing what is birth trauma, what happens to us in our bodies and our brain when we experience birth trauma, what are the commonly causes birth trauma, how might this show up, how might mum, your birthing partner or dad know that they've experienced birth trauma, and what parents can do to help yourselves. What can husbands, partners and support people do to help someone who's experienced birth trauma, and what other support is available. So, Kate, what is birth trauma and what happens to our bodies and what happens to our brains when we experience birth trauma?
Yeah, and it's, I think it's, if we want to look at birth trauma, it's a really good idea to look at trauma more generally first, and also kind of look at or understand the human response to threat. So what happens to us as humans when we experience a threat or we perceive a threat, our body instantly, our body and our brain instantly switches into survival mode, and it does this automatically, and it does it extremely quickly, like less than the blink of an eye. We don't even kind of think about it, right? And the reason our body and our brain does this is so that we can either manage the threat and certainly keep ourselves safe. and our loved ones safe, right? Because I guess the interesting thing about birth-related trauma is that it's not necessarily just ourselves that is threatened, but it could be our baby or, as you mentioned earlier, our partner who's birthing. So, so in response to threat, I guess initially our brain, it initiates what's called a fight or a flight response in our body, and this is what's called something called our sympathetic nervous system kind of kicks into gear. So what happens in our body is our heart rate increases, blood flow to our muscles increases, our blood pressure shoots up, and our pupils dilate. And all these things happen so that we can either flee, so flight, so we can either run in the other direction, or we can fight the threat. And sometimes, particularly in the birthing situation, that's not possible, right? Like we might be kind of lying on a bed, or we might be strapped up to machines, and so on. So if we can't do either of those things, and as I say, that's really common in the birthing situation, our body goes into the next stage of stress or threat response, and that's what's called a freeze or a flop state. And this is what's called our parasympathetic nervous system kicks in. So and again, different things kind of happen, but what can happen with freeze or flop states or responses rather is that we can kind of shut down and really struggle to hear things, struggle to speak, and so on. So people may have heard of those words: fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and flop. And it's really, really kind of crucial, I think, to understand that these responses to threat are so normal, like they're just incredibly natural. We don't have any control over them, right? Like it happens at the brain stem level of our brain. And it happens at the nervous system level. So really important to remember that, because I think that when we've experienced birth trauma, we often think, oh, well, I just should have done X, or I just should have stood up for myself, or I just should have, left there, or whatever. But it's really important to know that we just really don't have that kind of control often when we're in that state. So yeah, that's a lot of information, but that's our body and our brain's response to threat. And the trauma happens when we kind of struggle to get out of those states. We struggle to get out of a fight state or a flight state or a freeze state, for example. And we struggle to get back to a calm and connected kind of place and operating in the other parts of our brain. People may have just a note about triggers. So people may have heard the term trigger or being triggered, and often you'll see on posts on mums groups and things, trigger warning. And that's really it's really about our body and our brain kind of thinking, oh, I've got to be on high alert again, I've got to get back there, I've got to be in survival mode again. And often I hear people talk about maybe a smell. The smell of hand sanitizer is a really common one, particularly if baby's been in NICU, or certain beeping sounds for NICU parents that sound like monitors, or even sensations, or maybe even driving past the hospital where someone's birth trauma occurred. These can all be things that kind of flick us straight back into that survival mode, into that threat response space. So that's a bit about trauma generally, and kind of the human response to threat. And birth trauma specifically is really trauma that occurs in relation to birth. So that can be anywhere or any time, I suppose, from pregnancy, labour and birth, and right through to kind of early postpartum as well. So it's a lot of information to take on, but I guess the key things for me is for people to remember that it's really, really normal. It's a really, really natural response, and it's actually incredibly common. Research suggests that 1 in 3 mums or birthing parents will report their birth as traumatic, which is that's a figure that is just staggering to me. But I really want people to know that even though it's a normal kind of natural response that we can't control, even though it's really common, doesn't mean that we have to struggle through it. Doesn't mean that we have to just kind of live with it, I suppose.
Absolutely. So what would some of the causes of birth trauma be, Kate?
Yeah, and it's I guess, I mean, I've got a list that I can of common causes that I can kind of share, but I think it's really important again for people to know that the causes of birth trauma are so diverse, and it's really down to the individual to consider, whether their experience was traumatic or not. And often in the birth trauma community, we hear, quite kind of clinically traumatic or medically traumatic births feel absolutely fine for the mum, and vice versa. So kind of clinically or medically normal births being really traumatic for the birthing parent. So just a note before I kind of rattle some of the common causes off, that it's really up to the person themselves.
So it's really individual.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Because one thing for someone might be fine for someone else.
Okay.
So it's really important that we kind of don't compare our experiences. And often too, I think that we have this feeling of, oh, well, it wasn't that bad, like somebody's always got it worse. And it's like they may do. Somebody may have it worse, but actually our feelings are really, really valid. And our need for support is really, really valid. So, but some of the common kind of causes, and there's very little research on birth trauma. It's growing, but there is very little research. But some of the common kind of things that we hear in the community and that research is telling us is stress and fear of the outcome is really, really common. So this quite commonly includes emergency procedures, for example, emergency cesarean. So where people just don't know what's going to happen in the next 5 minutes, for example. Feeling robbed of the desired experience. So, excuse me, this is really another really common cause, and an example of that might be if somebody really wanted a home birth but needed to head into hospital. So that's really common. Fearing for one's own life or life of baby, because as I mentioned earlier, that the threat doesn't have to necessarily be to us, but it can be to a loved one. Poor care from a midwife or doctor, and that's really, really, we hear that a lot. So the interactions that we have with healthcare professionals is really important in birth, and particularly unconsented procedures. So where something's been done to mum, where they haven't said that's okay, they haven't been asked if that's okay. Poor pain management and physical injury. So the first part of this live chat a few months ago was all around birth injury, and birth injury certainly has psychological kind of distress aspect to it too. Having baby in neonates, so either NICU or SCIBU, is hugely, hugely distressing, as is obviously baby death or disability. And then a few last ones. Triggering of past abuse is often a cause of birth trauma, and then discrimination. So that may show up as kind of ableism or racism in the birthing space, and then again in the interactions between whānau and healthcare practitioners. So those are some of the common ones that we hear, the common themes. But as I say, it's up to mum or dad to decide.
So it's a really individual thing, and it can be more than one thing.
Absolutely, absolutely. For some people, it's multiple things. For some people, it's just one. So and it's we're all such different individuals, right? We're individual souls with all different experiences. that we bring to a birth experience, so
Yeah.
they can all have an impact. Yeah.
Okay. So, how might somebody experience or exhibit birth trauma? How might mum or their birthing partner or the father of the child recognise that they've experienced something traumatic?
Yeah, and again, it's really, really individual for the individual. So it's it can be different for every.
Okay, we just seem to be having some technical difficulties where I've lost our connection with Kate. Kate, can you hear us? We can't hear you, Kate. We've lost some connection with you. Just give Kate a few minutes to see whether she can come back in. We can see you. We just don't have any sound from you, Kate. We've lost your sound. Kate did say that she had a little bit of lagging when we got together before this live presentation. But just reminding everybody that this is part 2 of our birth trauma presentation. So if you were wanting to catch up with part 1, that's available on YouTube. You just go searching for Plunkett birth trauma, and I'm sure they will provide the links in there. And throughout this presentation, there'll be lots of links provided. We're still trying to bring Kate back into this presentation, so sit tight, everybody. We will be back as soon as Kate gets things sorted at her end. She's just going to go out for a moment by the looks of things. I guess Kate's probably experiencing that fight or flight at the moment. I know she can hear me. We still have no sound from her. I'll just do a little bit of talking about Plunkett Line. So just reminding you that we are here for you 24/7. We will be here right throughout the holiday period, as we always are. You're allowed to call us as many times in a 24-hour period, and people will call us for a number of reasons. It might be about feeding issues. It might be around sleep. It might be about toilet training or starting solids. Many reasons for you to be calling us at Plunkett Line 24/7, right throughout holiday periods included. And I'll just do a little plug for one of my favourite websites that I often send parents to when I'm talking to them about anything, and that's kidshealth.org.nz. Kidshealth.org.nz covers everything that may occur for your little beautiful from the day they were born until when they're a teenager. If you have a look at their website, you'll see there's a list of common topics there, which are really, really good. And then underneath the common topics, it has what I call the 6 hot topics. And these are the things that are most being talked about in New Zealand by parents. And so it's always good to check down there and see what's happening out there. there is a search bar option, and you can put anything into the search bar. If you've got a little newborn baby, put newborn in there, put sleep, put crying. It's got some really good ideas on things that you can try with a crying baby. Yeah, like a solids, toilet training, everything is covered there. So have a look at that website. So Plunkett has input into the website, Ministry of Health, paediatricians, and lots of other really good services. So really great website, kidshealth.org.nz. Kate's just coming back in to see whether there's any improvement. Are you back, Kate? We've still got no sound from you. We're just trying to try a couple of things to bring Kate back in. Very important guest. If anybody has any questions, you're more than welcome to put those forward, and we will hopefully have some time to get to those. I think Kate's going to just go out again and then hopefully come back in. Oh, can you try that, Kate? Yes, can you try that? Yes. Hi, welcome back.
Aroha mai, sorry, team.
That's okay. That's okay. We had that little bit of warning that you were having a little bit of lag and things. So, yeah.
Bravo, Dawn, for holding down the fort. Sorry, team. Let's okay. Keep our fingers crossed that doesn't happen again. And if it does, I'll know exactly what to try.
Oh, perfect. So,
yes.
we were just back at that. How might somebody exhibit birth trauma?
Sure. Okay. So I think I'll run through the list because it's reasonably straightforward and to catch up on a little bit of time. But intense feelings of grief, confusion, shock, loneliness, rage. So the rage certainly relates to the fight response that I mentioned earlier. Fear of future pregnancy and birth. So lots of mama and whānau just shut up shop after birth trauma because they just can't even think of kind of going there again, which is totally understandable. Feelings of failure within parents, particularly if the birth trauma is related to that kind of, one-on-one experience and then having something quite different, can bring up lots of feelings of failure. Clinically diagnosable mental health challenges. So, for example, postnatal depression and postnatal anxiety. Post-traumatic stress disorder can also occur because of birth trauma, which often people hear that and they go, oh, right, okay. But absolutely, as well as obsessive compulsive disorder. So that kind of hypervigilance, which might get fixated on something, like maybe getting really kind of worried and honing in on babies feeding or babies sleeping or so on.
Right.
Having flashbacks, being really regularly triggered, having nightmares or avoiding places that do trigger or things that do trigger are often signs of PTSD and also certainly of birth trauma. I'm just going to double check my list here, but breastfeeding can be impacted by birth trauma as well as bonding with baby. So kind of feeling like you don't have that, completely falling in love with my baby, in the first moments kind of thing, which is really, really normal.
Absolutely.
Yeah, a mistrust of medical professionals is really, really common within the birth trauma community, particularly if there was unconsented procedures or the interactions with medical professionals are what led to the birth trauma. And sometimes this can mean that mama or parents who've experienced birth trauma kind of avoid medical procedures and things that might be quite routine later on in life. For example, going to the dentist. I completely struggle with going to the dentist because it's just really triggering. Or smear tests, for example. And so I think, if we're avoiding those things, it's a really good, it's kind of like a little tap on the shoulder saying, if you're avoiding these things because you're feeling too triggered, then that's maybe a good suggestion to try and go and try and find some support, because it's impacting life now and our well-being now. And lastly, relationship challenges with a spouse or a partner are quite common as well, or other people that are kind of close to us. And I think it's important to note too that a lot of the things that I mentioned are really common with new parenthood anyway, right? Like that kind of shock of like, oh my goodness, what's going on here? Or we talk of mum rage and that kind of thing. So it's kind of hard to know, like the things that I've mentioned aren't certainly birth trauma related, but again, they're just a good kind of, it's good to think about it, and it's like a little tap on the shoulder going, maybe it's a good idea to kind of explore this and look into it and see if it's related to my birth experience.
What would be some things that parents could do to help themselves, Kate?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The My Birth Story website lists some suggested kind of strategies to help us begin to process our experience, to help us to kind of go there, if you like. And some of those things, one of the things that we kind of as a first point of call for people is to read through our birth notes. So every birth has a set of birth notes. The practitioners have to write, and they have to provide you with them if you request them. So they can be got from your midwife or people's hospital where they've birthed. So reading through those can often be really kind of enlightening and just fill in a whole bunch of gaps and mean that we can kind of gain knowledge around what happened and possibly even why as well. So that can be really great. Also, writing out our birth story. And what I often suggest to people is a really good idea is to write what happened, but also how you felt about it, because what happened and how we feel about it are quite different things. So this is get a piece of paper and put a line down the middle and have on one side what happened and the other side how I felt about what happened. Joining a support group can be really, really comforting because I think often we feel really, really alone, when we have
Isolated.
Yeah, totally. So joining a support group, I'd really encourage that. The birth trauma community, I've never met a more stunningly beautiful, supportive, non-judgy group of parents, predominantly mums. So certainly encourage that. Another way to kind of start to process is to write out your birth story, and then maybe set it aside for a little bit, and then excuse me, come back to it and kind of edit it, but edit it as if it was maybe your best friend's story, or as if you were kind of talking to your best friend, if that makes sense. Because I think we're often really hard on ourselves, we're often our own worst critic. So writing out your story and going back to it and editing it in the most kind way that you possibly could. Or if you have a trusted, friend or family member who is really going to validate and support, how you're feeling and validate your experience, then you could possibly get them to do it for you, to do the editing. Therapy in rongoa is another really great way, if you have the resources, a really great way to kind of gain some clarity and some healing. There's a big long list on the My Birth Story website of practitioners who can offer therapy, and the ACC website has a big long list of rongoa Māori practitioners if people are looking for people. And just on that note, the maternal birth injury scheme, so if people have experienced a physical birth injury since the ACC scheme started and their claim has been accepted, then they are eligible for counselling and rongoa under that claim. So you've just got to ask, and you might have to do a little bit of toing and froing to get there, but you definitely, that's part of that scheme, it's part of that package, is to have access to rongoa and to counselling. Excuse me. And lastly, if people feel like they kind of need to, and they feel like it would be a positive thing for them, then the various complaints processes are available to people to provide feedback and complain if they feel like that's going to be a valuable thing for them to do. My suggestion would be, if you're going to do that, if you're going to go down that route, then make sure you're well supported, because it can be a harrowing kind of process.
Okay, cool. And what about husbands, partners and support people? What can they do to help someone who's experienced some birth trauma?
Yeah, and that's, other whānau members are in such an incredible valuable position, to support mums and birthing parents. And they can often be, a real rock for mum. A couple of tips from us would be to validate mum. Don't try and fix, because you can't. So just keep that kind of front and center, that you're there to support, and one of the best ways to support is to validate. So saying things like, yeah, it was really hard, I'm sorry, it was really hard, you deserve support, and I'm here to help you to get that. And following their lead, I think, is another thing to remember on the note of not trying to fix someone. So just asking them what they want and following their lead. And often, particularly initially, mums who've experienced birth trauma will go, well, no, it's fine, I just want to forget about it, or I don't know, or I'm fine, and it's just, I think that's often an indication of it just being a bit soon. So maybe just leave it. I mean, we know each other best, right? So if you know that they're just kind of, they need a little bit of a nudge to go, actually, no, I'm really not fine, then give them a wee nudge, or just give them a little bit of space and come back to it, later on. And I just on that note around validation, I think it's really important to kind of acknowledge some of the common attitudes that mums and birthing parents who've experienced birth trauma kind of come up against when we express our distress. Some of the things I mean, for example, comments such as, "Oh, well, at least baby's okay," or if baby's in NICU, well, at least they're where they need to be. They're in the best hands. Or what's some other common ones? It was so long ago, just let it go. And often those kind of comments, they're made with the intention of being supportive, and they're made with the intention of kind of trying to find the good and divert us towards the positive. But what they can actually do is dismiss mum's experience and how she's feeling, and kind of shut us down and really put up barriers to us expressing our distress later on, or put up barriers to us going and trying to find support later on. So I'd really recommend, instead of saying that kind of thing, saying something along the lines of, "That was really rubbish, and I'm sorry it was rubbish, and how can I help?" Yeah. What else have I got there on my list? I'll just have a quick. That's right. On the My Birth Story website, there's a page that's called Friends and Whānau, and at the bottom of that page is a very brief video which explains about the difference between empathy and sympathy, and that's a really good example of how to kind of not try and put a silver lining around things for mum, but to how to best support them and kind of be there for them. Other things people can do, just asking how they are, just especially for friends who might not know yet that they've had that mum's had a really tricky time, just saying, "How was it? How was the birth?" And listening, really kind of listening, and as well as that, helping mum to get the support that she needs. So that might look like minding baby while she writes out her birth story, cooking dinner while she's doing that, or minding baby while she goes and gets some therapy or what. So supporting them to support themselves, I guess. And lastly, looking after yourself, I think, is really important. The support person role can be a pretty hefty one, but it's a really, really vital one. So making sure that dads and husbands and partners and so on really look after themselves is super important too.
Fantastic. Gosh, it's definitely, it's a how women experience it, isn't it? It's definitely an individual thing, and it's just so individual to that individual and totally different for everybody. And not being dismissive of how you're feeling by also saying, "Oh, I'm okay because Mary down the road, she had it 10 times worse than me."
Yeah, for sure.
We just had a question pop up, Kate. So this question is from Kim. I had a traumatic birth where I got bilateral anterior labial tears, which I had with my first, but worse with my second. I had 15 sutures all the way up to my labia minora, including my clitoris, in which I had to have a catheter in for nearly 48 hours. I lodged an ACC claim with my GP with the hope of some aftercare and pelvic floor physio. I just got a letter back saying my claim is not accepted accepted, then they will be looking into it more. Do you know what happens after that if that's not accepted?
Yeah, and that I'm really sorry that's happened, Kim. That's a really sounds really full on, and particularly thinking that ACC is going to provide some care, and then getting that declined at this point. So I really hope that it is accepted. The thing with the new maternal birth injury scheme is that when the legislation changed to bring in the scheme, the legislation listed 13 specific injuries that would be covered under the scheme. It's very different to what many of us campaign for, but that's what the legislation ended up as. And so ACC can only cover those injuries that are listed in that legislation. And so hopefully, I remember her saying that they're going to look into it more. So hopefully it will come back that that injury is kind of related to a perennial tear, hopefully, because that means that it will be covered, because perennial tears of any grade are covered under the new scheme. If it comes back and it's not covered, then you have the option of going under ACC, so applying for what's called a treatment injury. And a treatment injury is only covered if it can be proved that the injury occurred because of treatment that was given, or treatment or a lack of treatment. So treatment that was not given led to that injury. And if that's not the case, or if that's declined again under a treatment injury, then you'll need to just rely on the public health system, unless you have insurance and can go, or the personal resources and can go private. Yeah.
So that might sit with the next question from Tara Kate, which is it true you can't get ACC if you had a botched episiotomy? On the ACC website, episiotomies are not covered under the proposed legislation. This procedure is performed by a registered health professional and wouldn't meet the updated definition of an accident being caused by a force or resistance internal to the human body at any time from the onset of labour to the completion of delivery.
And episiotomy. So I've been part of an advisory group that's been advising ACC as they bring in the new scheme, and episiotomy has been something that there's been a lot of discussion about, because an episiotomy is very similar impact-wise for mama. An episiotomy is very similar to a tear. So as the website says, episiotomies are not automatically covered, but I just mentioned treatment injury. So it may be that a botched episiotomy could be covered by ACC under treatment injury. A word of warning about treatment injury: you're absolutely entitled to go and make a claim under treatment injury. However, it can be quite a process, because effectively you've got to prove that the injury is caused by the treatment or the lack of treatment. That would be a way to potentially gain care under ACC, is to go for to look at that option, treatment injury.
Okay. What about other supports for whānau out there, Kate? What's available?
Sure. So there is an incredible amount of support out there, right from support groups, as I say, right through to psychologists and so on. Many of those supports are listed on the My Birth Story website. So that's mybirthstory, all one word, .org.nz. And the external resources page has a big long list of all the different types of supports. People can talk to their GP. So Allied Health, as I understand, GP clinics that are connected with Allied Health can get some free counselling appointments. and potentially other clinics as well. And as well as that, kaupapa Māori providers may offer free sessions as well. So it's it's a good idea to check, because they can only say no, right? Yeah, My Birth Story, check with the GP, and then if there's not what you're looking for on My Birth Story or with your GP, then please do feel free to get in touch with me, and I'll see if there's any other options that spring to mind within people's kind of location. The contact us page on My Birth Story comes straight to me and only me. So yeah, people, if they've got any questions after tonight, or there's anything that I've said that you're like, oh, what, I didn't quite understand that, or if people want to ask me if there's certain supports in their region, then they're welcome to drop me a line and get in touch. Yeah.
Wow, thanks, Kate. Your kitty is so big with this stuff, and so full of this stuff. It's absolutely fantastic to have you with us tonight. Can I just get you to go back and do that safety stuff? If they're supporting anything up for women or their partners or their husbands. Yeah,
that's a really good idea. So mybirthstory.org.nz has that big long list of support options. It also lists some of the crisis numbers. So that's the crisis numbers that are kind of online or on telephone and so on, as well as some of the crisis teams around the country. And also 1737, people can call or text that number, and you'll be connected with a counsellor on the other end. Not one associated with Birth Trauma Aotearoa, but just generally. So yeah. Kia ora, Dawn. Thank you, and thanks for everybody's patience with the technical glitch.
It's okay. It was good to see that fight or flight in action there for a bit. And just also reminding everybody that Plunket line is there 24/7, and if you're not sure about what directions to go in, then pick up the phone and call us, and one of the Plunket line nurses will be there for you, including over those public holidays. Thanks everybody for joining us, and just reminding you, if you want to revisit part 1, the links will be provided, but I believe it's available on YouTube if you just search under YouTube. Thanks everybody. See you soon.